Thank you all for inviting me into this amazing space today. It's funny, I grew up here in Marin. I am a product of Marin County Public Schools. I graduated from Old Mill School in Mill Valley in 1985, and Mill Valley Middle School in 1988, and Tam High School in 1992. And so much of who I am and what I'm here to share with you today is very molded by that experience, by being one of a handful of BIPOC kids in the 80s in Southern Marin in our schools. And a big reason why I'm here today and what drives me. And it was funny driving in this morning, because I remember when this was an active military base. I played soccer on these fields here in Hamilton. I had a girlfriend whose dad was here and lived on the base. I remember going to the commissary in high school. And so it's always amazing to me to see how much Marin changes over time, and also how much Marin can stay the same over time in some really wonderful and beautiful ways, and maybe in some ways that we still need to all work on together. But the spirit and the energy that you all have here is amazing and wonderful, and thank you for being who you are and creating this space for each other and for this county. I feel that empathy is one of the things, particularly coming out of the pandemic, that we all need to have a laser focus on growing and sharing and cultivating. We seem to have lost a little bit of our culture of care. In honor of your core values of connectivity, of inclusivity, and what's the third one? Authenticity. Thank you. I'm surprised that's the one I let go in my mind. Many of you don't know me. You're about to learn a lot about me. My kids may hear some things about their dad and my life, and you may have some questions, and I promise we'll talk afterwards about any questions that you may have or things that come up. But essentially I'm here today to invite us into a reflection about how we conceive of this idea that has been so beautifully laid out by all the speakers that have come before me, by the band, by the affirmation, by the prayer service. But what is this core idea? And I'm here to juxtapose that idea, the idea of father and the idea of daddy. And as I talk, I hope I invite you into reflecting onto why I'm drawing such a distinction on a day that we call Father's Day. So I want to start by just doing one more welcome to all of us as we celebrate the glory of the Creator. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you here today to accept and celebrate us as we are, with all we bring, with all of our ancestors and all of our guardians that walk with us. We want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to offer their energy, their love, and their spirit to this space, and for continuing to bless all of our lives day in and day out. Your sacrifices have allowed you to be fruitful and abundant. We would also like to extend a warm welcome to all of the newcomers here, like myself and my family, and anybody else that's tuned, and anybody else that's still walking in. Thank you for being here today. The universe may have brought you and I here as a stranger, but I'm sure we'll make sure that we leave together as family. So, it's really important to extend some appreciations and definitions. I'm blessed to have been invited here to address you today by Cindy and by all of you amazing and loving people here at the Unity Church of Marin. humbled and honored that Cindy and Reverend Deanne would invite me into this space. It was rather unexpected. I gotta say, I've never started a Father's Day by addressing a church, so that's a pretty magical and special thing, right? Usually it's kind of sleepy and breakfasty and some other things. So I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. But as Cindy shared, I've known Cindy for about a decade and have really been blessed to learn with her as a student, for her to care for my daughter and ensure that she had a high-quality early childhood education, and as a co-conspirator in the fight for truth and justice and equity. I think we've had a reciprocal effect on each other, both inside and outside of learning spaces and living spaces and educating spaces. Cindy has a reach that is Bay Area, is state, is national, and it's awesome that we were able to connect here and do some of this work here in Marin, where I grew up. So, without further ado, we're gathered here today on Father's Day. And so I think it's really important to unpack the definition of what fatherhood is and what it means to be a father. I once was told by a close friend, in reference to someone we know, they are a father and not a daddy. If you take one thing away from today, I want to invite you to lean into this important distinction. Before we get there, though, I want to acknowledge the diversity of identity here, and I want to invite you to consider that although the words father, fatherhood, dad, and daddy are perhaps some of the most gendered words in the English language, I don't intend for them to be attached or ascribed to any particular gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, or any other identity that perhaps has been historically excluded from consideration when we think of these words.
Yes. Amen. Thank you.
That being said, my intention today is to discuss my own experiences and identification with these terms, beginning in my childhood, extending to my young adult life, and culminating with my current bouncing experience. For the purpose of identifying the individual that contributed the Y chromosome to all of us, going to refer to that human being as biological father or father. I will refer to dad, daddy, and fatherhood as relational and not having to do with biology. If this doesn't fit with your personal definition of these words just yet, I invite you to lean into a little bit into that discomfort for the time being and listen to my story. My relationship with fatherhood is complex, probably like many of you. That is due primarily to what society has worked very hard to socialize us into. Ultimately, the idea of fatherhood is often shaped by religion or socioeconomic status, culture, language, region even, where we've grown up, and our experiences with both acute and intergenerational trauma. Although I have just worked very hard to make some clear distinctions regarding the definition of these words, the reality is that in many places in the world, these words are completely conflated. A word we like to use a lot in our doctoral program, Cindy and I, but it simply just means confused with. They're confused with ideas about gender and gender identity and gender expression. Often the qualities of masculinity and fatherhood are considered to be one and the same, but I don't believe that they should be. And shortly, I hope all of you may understand why. I am blessed to know my Father. I say this because I know that there may be some people sitting here today who may not know who their Father is for various different reasons. For instance, one of my siblings had to wait almost 40 years to receive the blessing of knowing who their father was. I knew my father essentially from birth, as much as an infant can know such a thing. In reality, most of this knowing is a reconstruction of old grainy pictures from the early 1970s. Combined with a few fleeting and vivid memories of running through the heather, or listening to my parents argue with each other, or listening to my dad communicate so loudly in Spanish with my uncle, my tío, that I almost always thought that they were fighting too. There are some memories of walking and wrestling in there too. My father was born in 1935 in Colombia. His father, my grandfather, was one of 17 children, 11 of whom survived war and the cholera epidemic. I come from a long line of fathers who were deeply involved in the military. Of those 11 surviving children, my grandfather was the only one to have cisgendered, heterosexual, biologically male children. Yeah, from 17, one. For decades of my life, I was told my grandfather was the only one of the 11 that had boys. This was not reality. My cousin recently completed a family genealogy, and I discovered that, like much of what my father told me growing up, this wasn't fully true. My father and my tío had a cousin, the son of their uncle Benjamin. He was a gay man who lived in the mid-20th century in Colombia, in a time and place that couldn't have been less accepting of his sexual orientation. If you have seen the movie Encanto, and if you haven't, you should watch it. It's a newer Disney flick. One of several things that the movie got right is that all Colombian families hold many, many secrets. It's true. Mine is no exception. It's really part of our culture. And although my family should not have had any shame about my father's gay cousin, they did. So much so that they essentially erased him from history. Much like what they did with another cousin who, after his wife died, fathered children with two of his daughters. Yeah, I mean, maybe that was one we wanted to erase, but the reality is that things happen, right, in the world, and things happen in people's lives, and rarely is it beneficial to actually scrub them from history, whether they were painful, whether they were right, whether they were wrong. So why would I bother to share such painful and traumatic events with you on a day meant to celebrate fatherhood? Essentially because it's part of the journey that I have walked to stand before you today and to acknowledge all of this painful, traumatic, and hurtful experience that many of us may have attached to the term father. While I wish it was all roses and rainbows and nothing but happy memories, the reality for me and probably for some of you, is something quite different. One of my most vivid memories as a child is really connected to my definition of father. I wasn't born until a few weeks after my father's 39th birthday. For most of my early childhood, my father and my tío took turns impressing upon me the importance of having a biological male child. You see, I was the last of my line. I can remember as early as 18 months old them telling me, you have to have a son. It's your duty. I have literally hundreds of uncles and aunties and cousins in Colombia. There are too many to count. But I'm the only one that for most of my life could pass on our family name. And anytime I went there, they all reminded me of that. It wasn't just my uncle and my dad. By the time I was 17 or 18, I had aunties and girl cousins just going, hey, what are you waiting for? Just have some kids. Let's go. It wasn't particularly high on my list of things to do at that time. They all impressed upon me with great seriousness that if I did not have a son, that our family would die out. If you can't already tell where this is going, my parents got divorced when I was about 3.5. They engaged in a fierce custody battle. My father lost custody of me, and I think to a certain extent, it broke his heart a little. He had a tenuous relationship with his own father and grandfather, and the nature of which is too long to expound upon here, but suffice it to say that both my grandfather and great-grandfather made great sacrifices to ensure that my father was the first member of that side of my family to go to college. When he didn't conform to their beliefs about what his life should be after that, there were serious consequences to their relationships. My grandfather died before I was born, a stubborn, proud man who refused his eldest son's call, even on his deathbed. My dad, my father, was scared and worried about what would happen to me. He threatened to kidnap me and take me to Colombia, where my mother would never be able to find me. He told her that if she didn't give me to him, that I would likely become a gay priest in absence of a father. My mother, for her part, never once denigrated my father. She told me later in life that she was confident that I'd be able to draw my own conclusions about who did what in my life, and she never felt the need to try to sway me in any direction. My father, on the other hand, every weekend I went to see him under the new custody order, never tired of denigrating my mother, calling her names, instigating discord in our relationship. The problem is, while he worked as a doctor at our local hospital, my mother stayed home with me, forging what would soon become an inseparable bond. When they divorced, we couch surfed, we rented rooms from friends, my mom living in a foreign country, was hard-pressed to find gainful employment, given that she had just completed nursing school here in the United States of America. They wanted her to go to nursing school again to be a nurse in the UK, something that she was not going to do. It was just me and her, living through the death of her mother, struggling to make ends meet. All the while, my father refused to pay a single penny in alimony. We did the math one time when I was 18 years old. I remember this is like 1970s, 1980s money. I think he owed $186,000 by the time I turned 18. Eventually, my mom met a man who she decided to marry. Even at the age of 6, I was worried for her. He had moments where he would lose his temper, moments when he yelled at her uncontrollably, moments when he hit her and hit me. I remember crying through their entire wedding. Shortly after that, we moved back here to Marin. There was something about wanting and needing to protect your mama when you are a little boy and are powerless to do so that is particularly conflicting. That began the dawn of my second experience with a man who tried to be my dad. My stepfather worked hard to create a relationship with me. His own experiences with his dad undoubtedly coming into play. Much like my father, there were aspects of our relationship that weren't all bad. He read me Tolkien and other great British literature and children's books. The child of an English father and a German mother, he had some very strong ideas about how children should act, particularly around the dinner table and other kinds of etiquette. He was regularly upset by the informal culture my hippie mom and I had developed living alone for several years prior to his relationship with us. Curt and tense reminders were constant. When those didn't work, they were often followed by slaps to different parts of my body. He was usually strategic enough to hit me when my mom wasn't looking or wasn't around, or in places that could be easily covered by clothing. I don't know for sure why he did these things, but my sense was that as an aspiring writer and actor, he was frustrated about what leaving the UK had meant for his promising career, and also what moving to this country meant for him. As you can imagine, these experiences didn't really create a close bond between my stepfather and I. As a matter of fact, the older I got, the more I felt compelled to not be anything like him at all. I stopped acting. I had been the lead in the school play every year. I stopped singing. I stopped playing music. I could read music fluently in the 6th grade and play the cello. The only consistent relationship I had with a man was my mom's dad, my granddad. He picked me up almost every day from school and brought me home so he could collect the mail from the home he had purchased in 1965 on Mount Tam, where I grew up and where my mom still lives today. My granddad was a man of very few words. Early on in our relationship, I remember asking my mom, "Mom, does Granddad like me?" I asked her that because for an almost 15-minute car ride from Old Mill School up the mountain, he wouldn't say anything unless I asked him the right question. You see, he was a Depression-era kid who served in World War II, one of the first people to ever work for the Social Security Administration in this country. And I would learn later that everything he did was meant to teach me something. It just wasn't his way to do it through words. He was consistent, though, and kind. He listened a lot. I also learned he was a great storyteller with the right prompts, even though most of his answers, when you asked him a question, consisted of, yep, nope, and well, even to open-ended questions. That was often his response. He never would ask me questions about what I wanted to do in my life, but he always supported me. The first album I ever bought with my own money was in third grade in about 1983, and it was Prince's Purple Rain. Quite a scandalous album for an 8-year-old third grader to buy. But without question, he picked me up from school. I said, Dad, Granddad, can you take me to Village Music in Mill Valley? And he said, sure, no problem. He pulled up, he parked in front, did not get out of the car, and allowed me to go make my own purchase. Purple Rain. I used to listen to it in secret before my mom got home from work. Being a mixed-race kid in Southern Marin in the early 80s and trying to figure out what that meant, trying to navigate a mixed-race identity without very much guidance from any of the men who reasonably could have or should have helped me to do that, was both a blessing and a curse. Primarily due to the constant, consistent, unconditional love provided to me by my mom and the circle of women who raised me, aunties, godmothers, my mom's friends, and occasionally their dads as well. I didn't internalize a lot of what was happening to me. I felt like my stepfather was constantly trying to make me feel bad about myself, so I decided it was my duty just to never feel that way. This made dealing with the constant bullying, teasing, and racial discrimination that characterized going to school here in the early 80s a little bit less daunting. Some people crumble, some people internalize, and some people get tough and resilient. If you can't tell by now, I did the latter. I have since then found it easier to create secure attachments, more easy to create secure attachments with women than with men. This reality didn't just extend to the adult men in my life, but also influenced my friendships. While I didn't at the time realize the gifts my grandfather was bestowing upon me with his lead by example ethos, I at least had one person who I could count on for a few things. This was the 80s. There were no after-school programs. We were literally all latchkey kids. My grandfather, at great cost to his relationship with the woman he married after my grandma passed away, decided it was better to go get the mail every day and take his grandson home from school than keep a happy home. With shades of my stepfather, my step-grandmother had some very strong ideas about how children should act, never having had children herself. Needless to say, I conformed to none of them. This meant that I spent hours alone. Once or twice a week, my stepfather was supposed to pick me up from school. He was often late, and so I would play at the park. I'd go check to see if he was there. I'd go back and play. One day I was having a particularly good time, and he was particularly late, and he left. So without having a way home, and having watched my mother and a grandfather always pick up hitchhikers, I decided I would hitchhike home. That is how I met one of the first daddies in my life. I threw out my thumb, I got picked up, and these two nice men in this old T-Bird said, "You probably shouldn't be hitchhiking. Where are you going?" And I told them my address, and they said, "You should never tell anybody your address when you hitchhike." And they brought me home, and they scolded my stepfather. They were the first married gay couple that I knew. And they later went on to become my godparents. They took care of me in a lot of ways. A few other things happened that really have influenced my idea of being a daddy or a father. My mom and my stepfather had two brothers, two sons, two of my little brothers. And when they inevitably divorced, I ended up raising them a lot. And I learned some very important lessons about what it means to be a daddy. One of the things that my brothers taught me was, you can't force your kids into doing anything. You really can't. You have to let them choose what they love and support them in the way that my grandfather did. I was an all-star football player and baseball player. My little brothers wanted none of this. They're both black belts in Taekwondo, but despite all of my cajoling and support, I couldn't get them to be interested in what I was interested in. Other people that were instrumental in shaping my idea of daddy were my athletic coaches. If you went to Safeway in Mill Valley in the 80s, there was a man that worked there named David Hall. And if you had a kid, he recruited your kid to play Pop Warner football. My mom did not want me to play football at all and told me, "Hey, when you turn 11, you can play football." I'd probably been asking for 2 years. I blew out the candles on my 11th birthday cake and said, "Ma, you got 3 days to sign me up for football." David became a daddy to me. His brothers, who coached me later, became daddies to me. Tim Grayson, who coached Babe Ruth baseball here, is a legendary baseball coach in Marin, became a daddy to me. And the beauty of not having had a daddy was that I got to pick and choose the qualities from each of these men that I wanted to embody in my own life, but I didn't have to take on any of their negativity or challenges. And that was a great, great gift. I will also say that over time, as dreams of playing in the NFL and dreams of making it big in the music business began to fade, and I realized I might need a little bit more of a stable life, I became a teacher. And I found out that I love teaching kindergarten. One of my favorite ages. And it was amazing to me how many of the kids that I taught for over a decade, they all had fathers, but many of them were missing daddies. And for me, it meant that I didn't want to have kids because I work with kids all day. I didn't want to go be with kids after working with kids all day. And so a little bit later in life, I met a wonderful woman, and she had this beautiful little daughter. And I was so scared to be somebody's stepfather, given my experience. And you know how it is when you start an early relationship. You're not sure exactly where it's going to go or how it's going to be. That I don't know that I tried to be that little girl's daddy. But she taught me a lot about how to be a daddy. But I knew I couldn't claim that title from her, given what I had experienced. I knew that she had to bestow it upon me. And so one day when she was a little older, she was old enough to have a cell phone. She must have been 11 or 12 years old at the time. I couldn't find my phone. And we were frantically trying to leave the house and go somewhere. And I said, honey, can you call my phone so I can find it? She said, sure. I think she was still getting ready, so she gave me her phone. And in her phone contact, I was saved as Daddy. And so I knew at that point that whatever it was that I'd been doing to kind of resist the role wasn't working, right? And that I had officially become a daddy. And so I have become a daddy several more times with my 12-year-old daughter and my 4.5-year-old son. And I would like to, in closing, just say that, I think that daddies are different than fathers. And daddies are different than fathers because they're people who fight for and protect their families. They read and sing and wrestle and play with their kids. They nurture and push and inspire their children to believe in themselves, to take risks, to push their boundaries, and to try new things. They make sure their kids are safe and remind them of what to do to be safer the next time they take a risk. They help their kids identify their passions and dreams and support them to reach them while making sure that they are aware of other people's humanity along the way. Daddies make sure their kids are well-rounded and multidimensional in academics and arts and athletics and life skills. Daddies help children learn what their responsibilities are to their families, to their ancestors, and to their communities. Daddies learn a lot from their own kids, how to slow down, how to appreciate the little things, how to pay attention to life, to literally stop and smell the flowers. I thought I understood the concept of joy before I became a daddy, but I didn't, at least not fully. There's nothing that brings me more joy than watching my children enjoy their life, their surroundings, and their community. Prior to being a daddy, I thought joy was related to my own personal experiences. Daddies teach their kids to speak publicly, to read often, to play music and sports, to cook, to build a fire, to make a camp, to cut wood, to iron, to wash dishes, to do laundry, to work with tools safely, to grow things, to hug, to give and keep one's word, to serve others. And they also teach them how to deal with trauma. So thanks for joining me today. I say all this to say, perhaps today should be called Daddy's Day. To all of you who have daddied the youth in your lives, we celebrate you and them. It's okay to celebrate the fathers too, as without them, there would be no me and there would be no you. If more people in the world did what daddies do and focused less on being fathers, with deep respect, you might have more happy, full people and be less bothered. I love you, Jana, Alyssa, Ibama, Iraka. I know I am not yet the best daddy I can be. I also know that I'm blessed to have all of you on this journey. Thank you for choosing me to be your daddy. And also for being patient with me as I learn how to be a better one. And thank you all of you for inviting me here today.